We begin with extraordinary briefings up on Capitol Hill today. The Secretary of State, the Director of National Intelligence, and other high-level officials briefing the entire Congress, the House and the Senate, behind closed doors about the consulate attack that killed the United States ambassador to Libya and 3 other Americans. With rumors and speculation rampant, lawmakers were seeking facts, but many were not satisfied with what they heard, and they are fuming right now. Our senior congressional correspondent, Dana Bash, has been talking to some of them. Dana, these briefings just wrapped up. What are you learning? What happened?
What happened, according to members of Congress in both parties, is apparently not much new, and that is not making some of them happy, especially those who are already the most vocal critics of the administration on what happened and their administration's reaction to the bombings in Libya and other unrest throughout the Middle East. Listen to what John McCain said as he came out of the briefing for the senators.
Well, I learned nothing that I hadn't, in fact, less than I had read or seen in the media. It's pretty obvious that there's very likely that there was a terrorist organization that affiliated with Al-Qaeda. It was in Benghazi that had at least some role in this attack, which had mortars, heavy equipment, and rocket-propelled grenades. Not exactly a spontaneous demonstration.
But, Senator, that is not something that you were just told by the briefers in there.
Of course not.
Now, John McCain, of course, is a supporter of Mitt Romney. He is a staunch Republican who has, again, been a very vocal opponent of the administration on many of its foreign policy issues. But in this particular case, Wolf, I talked to Democratic senators as well. They weren't as worked up about it, but they also shrugged their shoulders and said, we didn't learn anything that we did not learn from you all at CNN and other media outlets.
You know, Dana, one of the big questions is whether the Americans who were killed in Libya had adequate security to begin with, especially on the 11th anniversary of 9/11. Now, what are lawmakers saying about that?
This is really a political Rorschach test. It depends on who you ask in a big way. I want you to listen to what the Republican chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Buck McKeon, said about that.
I think it's pretty obvious he did not have adequate security. Otherwise, he would probably be here today. So I'm really disappointed about that. I think when we put our people around the world at risk and don't provide adequate security, shame on us.
Now I want you to listen to what the ranking Democrat on that same committee, of course, both of them coming out of the same briefing, said on the same question, whether there was adequate security for the ambassador and the rest of them.
So he had adequate security, and this was a pretty heavy armed group that came fast and unexpected. And that's the other thing that they were very clear in there. There was no prior intelligence telling us of anything even remotely resembling the attack that took place. So, you know, this was certainly a dangerous part of the world. That's why they brought security. But there was no actionable intelligence prior to this indicating this type of attack was going to happen.
Again, no actionable intelligence. That is something that we are hearing from our administration sources, our colleagues over at the State Department and elsewhere. That is something that Republicans, John McCain and others, say that they are talking to their own sources in the region and getting different information about. One other thing that Adam Smith, the Democrat from Washington, also said is that the ambassador had 5 State Department security guards. That is something that they learned in this briefing, and that is something that our own Elise Labott reported this morning, and I think it maybe is in keeping with the frustration up here that they're learning more from our reporting than maybe they're getting from official channels at the White House and elsewhere.
Yeah, a lot of frustration up on Capitol Hill right now. Dana, thanks very much. Let's get a little bit more on what's going on. Joining us now, our CNN national security analyst, Peter Bergen, also our national security contributor, Fran Townsend. She serves on the CIA External Advisory Board. Last month, Fran visited Libya with her employer, McAndrews and Forbes. Kate Baldwin is here with me, as usual, as well. You know, a lot of speculation, Peter, about who may have been responsible for killing these Americans in Benghazi, Libya. Listen to what the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee said, because he's got his suspicion.
Al-Qaeda is the name that's been used, and I think that's probably what we're going to find out.
All right, you're an expert on Al-Qaeda. What do you think?
You know, I'm struck by something that hasn't happened, which is no claim of responsibility. You know, if Al-Qaeda or an Al-Qaeda affiliate had done this, which is after all a pretty big deal, that we would have had on a jihadi website now a claim of responsibility. And I was very struck by Awad Daman's interview with the Libyan Prime Minister, in which he said this is sort of a loosely knit, you know, jihadi group, a relatively small, you know, with no links to Al-Qaeda, and that sort of fits with this lack of claim of responsibility, Wolf.
What do you make of that, Fran? Because Awad Daman has suggested, and she's quoting the Libyan Prime Minister as saying there was, in his words, a loose coalition of people, including presumably some Al-Qaeda-affiliated folks.
Well, Wolf, what the question you just asked highlights is the many different versions of this that we've heard. I tend to agree with Peter that the fact that there's no formal claim of responsibility is very sort of un-Al-Qaeda-like. Although I do think, you know, what we're hearing from sources in the intelligence community, what the Prime Minister's statement suggests, is this jihadi group, whoever this was who perpetrated the attack that killed the ambassador, have some links, some communications with Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, which is in that region. And so, look, I think that this has been a big game of semantics. Was it an Al-Qaeda attack? Is this an Al-Qaeda-related group? Was it planned or pre-planned? Was there one attack, or were there two separate attacks, a protest and then the attack on the safe house? There's a lot of sort of gamesmanship going on in the words that are being used. Some of that may be intentional, but some of it really may be, Wolf. We're still in the early days of the investigation, and it took the FBI almost a week to get on the ground because of security conditions.
And Fran, I know this is one other thing that we have talked about quite a bit is this element of, did Ambassador Stevens have enough protection? Was there enough protection in Benghazi? I mean, you just heard also during Dana's report, there's clearly a split on Capitol Hill as members of Congress are leaving these briefings. Buck McKeon saying that it's obvious that the ambassador did not have adequate security. Adam Smith, a Democrat from Washington, saying something very different. What's your take on this at this point, then?
Well, look, I think it's easy to say. We have the tragedy of the ambassador's death, and so it's easy to say he didn't have adequate security. I think the right question to be asking, that nobody seems to give us a clear answer on, is, given what was the intelligence you had prior to September the 11th about the threat in Benghazi, what we know from all of our sources is that the threat environment was increasingly dangerous. It what did the government know in the classified arena? Did they have, how specific was the intelligence about that threat? And then to judge what his security was it adequate against that threat? I think it's fair to say this looked like a very sophisticated armed attack that killed the ambassador. It may be that they weren't anticipating that, but given what they did know, I think that's the standard against which we ought to judge whether or not his security was adequate.
You know, CNN reported, Peter, last night that the ambassador had apparently told some people that he was on an Al-Qaeda hit list, if you will. The secretary said Hillary Clinton was asked about that today. Listen to what she said.
I have absolutely no information or reason to believe that there's any basis for that.
I mean, if he's suggesting to people he was on an Al-Qaeda hit list, what do you make of that?
Well, I would say any American ambassador in a country with an Al-Qaeda presence, even a small one, is on an Al-Qaeda hit list. I mean, that's a sort of a logical, you know, whether it's Pakistan or Yemen or, you know, the parts of Libya where Benghazi is, where so many of these jihadists are actually based. They're not all over Libya. They're mostly in the region of Benghazi. So, you know, to me, it would just be kind of a matter of logic that somebody in his position would feel that he was threatened by these jihadists, whether they're Al-Qaeda formally or something much looser.
You know, a lot of folks are saying, Fran, and I want you to weigh in on this hit list notion, but also that it was a dereliction to even allow these Americans in such a sensitive, such a dangerous area like Benghazi, especially on the anniversary of 9/11.
You know, Wolf, we give tremendous amount of authority to our chief. You know, the ambassador is also known inside the government as the chief of mission. And he really is. He is the representative of the president and the United States government. So I agree with Peter that given his position, he would have been a target of al-Qaeda. I think it is important, though, to sort of say to our viewers, the notion that when you hear this phrase, an al-Qaeda hit list, there's no list, right? Nobody's walking around with 1 through 10 in their pocket, so they know what their priorities are. There are targets. Some of them are targets of opportunity, and they're based upon one's influence and what they represent. And in the ambassador's case, it was the United States. But whether or not he would have been able to go to Benghazi would have largely been left to his discretion. And then the security team around him would have advised him, based on where he was going, what the security requirement was.
Fran Townsend, thank you. Peter Bergen, thanks to you as well.